How's it going? It is Monday, January 22nd, the official second week of Thesis. I was just scrolling through my Twitter timeline and I saw some more buzzings about the Russian bots that have been tweeting out fake news things. I saw that Twitter put out a blog and essentially they're emailing every person who interacted with fake news during the election in 2016, which I think is really interesting and is definitely relevant to what I'm working on. I just wanted to drop some thoughts about that really quick. So yeah, I think it's super interesting to see that Twitter and Facebook are actively working on this problem, and it validates my idea in a way because theirs is a direct communication. We're emailing people that didn't sign up for these sorts of emails and saying, hey, by the way, this thing you interacted with was misleading, just so you know. So I think that really does validate my overall idea about like the dashboard of some sorts that tells you the types of things that you've been interacting with, if they're fake or not. But there's also been some news recently circulating about more Russian bots tweeting about the government shutdown, which I think is pretty interesting. So this problem is persistent. It's still something that's going on. And I think the automation of it is pretty fascinating. There are some tools to combat that. There's a Chrome plugin that can help you identify if an account is a bot, and it's actually fairly accurate, it seems. It just analyzes the type of content that they've put out and who they've replied to and how long they've had the account and that kind of thing. And it tells you whether they're a bot or not. So that's pretty interesting. I think with my final deliverable, I'm also going to include a list of tools that people can use to empower themselves for this problem. So things like that Chrome extension or Civic Owl, another Chrome extension that analyzes news sources and tells you if they're reliable or not. And then there's also some like Facebook Messenger bots. So I think that at the end of the project, I'm going to include some sort of page on a website or something that lists all that stuff and it helps people kind of prepare themselves for that. In Colorado this weekend, it snowed a lot. How's the weather?
Right now in Lakewood, it's 47 and mostly cloudy. Today, it'll be cloudy, with a forecasted high of 48 and a low of 33.
Okay, I just got to campus. I'm in one of the breakout rooms, which has whiteboard walls, as you can see behind me. This is notes from probably another class, not mine. Class, we're going over our thesis question and refining that and making sure it makes sense. We had a class last semester that was all about preparing for thesis and also getting our own like portfolio ready and stuff like that. I have a thesis question written, but this specific day in class we're basically perfecting that. So I have an interview tomorrow. I don't really want to talk about who it's with, just I don't want to jinx it, and I don't know if I'm even allowed to, but it's with someone who's pretty important at the company, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. At the very least, just to practice that skill, to practice interviewing over the phone, and then to maybe line something up for after I graduate. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I actually ended up getting in contact with this company through Twitter. Small world. The internet has made the world really small, so that's really cool. So yeah, you're probably going to see a lot of this room throughout the semester, or at least one of these rooms that look kind of like this. Anyway, I've been reading this book about misinformation and mass audiences, which happens to be titled the same thing, Misinformation in Mass Audiences. It's actually really interesting so far. It's fairly dense. It's a fairly dense read. Lots of big words started reading this guy last night for researching my thesis project. Yeah, it's interesting so far. It's basically, at this point, talking about how people choose whether something is true or not inside their head. So, like for instance, it's saying that there's two schools of thought. Either people always accept something as truth and then afterwards decide whether it's not. Like the second they read something, they immediately think of it as true. Or people think that you decipher as you go. But more research recently has shown that people tend to actually accept something and then assign it a value of true or false in their head. So if I told you, for instance, that all cats are female, you would immediately in your head think that's true, and then you would assess whether I'm a credible source, whether you've heard other people say things like that, or whether someone you believe more has said the opposite, and then you assign it a value of true or false. That's my general understanding of reading the first chapter of this last night. So I'll probably have other thoughts on that, but I mean, that makes sense to me that someone would see something, automatically believe it, and then after believing it, assign it true or false. Because, I mean, that's generally how I would think people think about things they hear. But it's interesting to assign that context inside of a digital space with news content and misinformation. There's also, like I said before, there's a section that talks about there's a section that talks about misinformation versus disinformation. And this book generally is going to use the term misinformation to assign to fake news or whatever. The idea let me find the name really quick. Habermas. This guy? I don't know how to pronounce that. So Habermas, or whatever his name is, Habermas, believes in misinformation, or he identifies misinformation versus disinformation, as well as establishing that truth is only possible when there's a consensus among people. And this book is written from the perspective that, in theory, this society is able to make a consensus on information, and if not a perfect consensus, at least a general consensus. And when something is generally thought to be true, it will be considered true for this book. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting so far. I'll keep reading it, obviously, and probably read every page, every word. It is a collection of short essays. So I just realized my box is in the shot, so I'm gonna move that out of the shot. We were working on our thesis statements in class this past Monday, and we're probably going to finalize that and then start working on our task list and stuff like that. So that's my question right now. How might the application of user experience design processes be leveraged in mitigating social media users' consumption of misinformation? That's my current thesis question. Before that, I was using the term user-centered design in it, and I was talking about validity, bias, and intention of viral news stories, and how to communicate that. But I think I'm moving more towards not only communicating bias, but also mitigating people's consumption of it in the first place, and maybe informing people what they're consuming. I think that might be where my unique piece of this puzzle fits in. Yeah, so those are just some thoughts right now. I recently started working with a new client, and they make the application called Flinto, which is a design prototyping tool. And they needed help making their tutorials. My first project with them was making this little space app mock-up thing. So I did the visual design for that, and then they created a prototype and a video showing you how to do that type of prototype. And that's live right now. So if you're interested in checking that out, here's a link to it. But yeah, essentially it's a tutorial on how to use Flinto, and it's using a design that I made. So that's pretty cool. It's live now, so check it out.